Hashikmoni, who was a Talmud of Rebbe Kiva, and there's a lot of information that was shared with us that really doesn't seem to be important. So let's just have a quick look at Tosfos. So Tosfos, if I'm not mistaken, speaks out at the bottom of Kuf Yates, I believe. Where is it? No, it's not Tosfos over here. It's Tosfos later. Maybe it's even. Oh, here it is. It's Tosfos and Kuf Yates on base, where we are, right over here at the bottom. Tosfos tells us, Nir Rashba, the Sover law, command the Omar, Tzlovchad, Hainu Mekoshish. Tzlovchad was the Mekoshish Eitim. And so it's brought down that there are those who hold that Tzlovchad was the Mekoshish Eitim. And he wasn't doing a bad thing, rather he was doing a good thing, because he was afraid that after the Egel and after the Meraglim, where they were told that they're no longer going into Eretz Yisrael, they thought the mitzvahs of the Torah no longer applied, because they thought that they were only getting the land of Eretz Yisrael because they were Makabel the Torah. Since they're now being refused it, maybe the whole deal is no longer binding. So he Bedavka wanted to violate Shabbos and display for everybody that he's going to be killed, so it would let Klal Yisrael know that we still mean business and we have to keep all the mitzvahs of the Torah. That's one shot. Another shot in why Tzlovcha did it is because they weren't sure what the Chiyuv Misa was for Shabbos, and Tzlovcha wanted to bring that up. But Im Kain, Tzlovcha didn't do something that should have been Mechayim with Misa, because we know that a Malacha Shein Tzricha Legufa is not Aser. So he did a Malacha Shein Tzricha Legufa. He didn't need the Eitzim. He just was trying to make a point. So really, make it in. It wasn't even Mechayim Misa. So how did Bezdin kill him? Bezdin killed him because Ein Loch L'dain Ella Mashe Nevroyos. They saw him being over. They gave him Masra, so they kill him. They don't have to know what's going on inside his mind if he had ulterior motives. So, therefore, Rebbe Kiva is the one who Masechet Shabbos. Tzlovchad wasn't teaching Klal Yisrael anything by delivering them the Torah. He wanted to show that if you're not going to listen to Moshe, you're going to get punished. So
who's saying this?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, whose opinion is this?
Rabbi Akiva.
So how does Rabbi Akiva know what was going on in his mind like 1,000 years later?
That I can't tell you. How does Rabbi Akiva know a lot of the things that he said?
Yeah, okay, but usually you have a Messiah, but the people there, how do you discover what somebody was thinking 1,000 years later?
I hear. I don't know, but it's mistaber to say that he wasn't a Balavera, and that's why the Benoit Tzlovchad were claiming that he should be entitled to the land.
But even if he had good intentions, he did the Avera, right? No matter what your intentions are.
No, because when it comes to Shabbos, it has to be a Melacha Tzricha Legufa. So technically, he didn't do it. He didn't violate Shabbos.
It must be okay.
So that's why he's not such a bad guy. But the problem is, Rab Shimon Hashikmoni is learning that the Mekoshish Eitim was a bad guy. And like we just learned at the end of yesterday, Shemegalgalin Choyve Aydechayim. According to Rabbi Kiva, who learns that it was Tzlovcha and it was done for good intentions, the Shimon Hashikmoni's approach of Megalgalin Choyve Aydechayim doesn't make sense. So that's why Zokt the Ben Yoda specifically that the Gemara speaks out that Shimon Hashikmoni Hayali Chaver Metalmidi Rabbi Kiva, because even though he was from the Talmidim of Rabbi Kiva, he didn't pass like Rabbi Kiva. He didn't learn like Rabbi Kiva. He didn't learn that the Mekoshish was a choiva. He learned that it was Tzlovchad who was doing it l'shem shemayim. That's why he spoke out that he was Mitalmidei Rabbi Akiva. Going a little further, the Gemara in Shabbos tells us that Rabbi Akiva said that the Mekoshish was Tzlofcha. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseir told him, you're in trouble regardless. Because if it's true what you're saying, what gives you a right to reveal something that the Torah concealed? The Torah didn't advertise that. And if you're wrong, then your mom is Mochi Shemra on Tzlofcha. That's what Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseir told Rabbi Akiva. But Rabbi Akiva was gutsy, if you can call it, in revealing that Tzlofcha was the Mekoshish. There's a Gemara in Shabbos that tells a story about a fellow who had a breach in his fence. He was examining his fence on Shabbos, and there was a breach, and he wanted to fix it. And then he thought it over, and he decided he's not going to fix it. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu made a nace that a tzalaf plant grew. There is a plant called tzalaf that we learned once, and I don't remember where. The Gemara asked, what is the toughest plant out there? The Gemara, the toughest plant out there is a tzalaf. Tzalaf is a unique plant because its stems are edible, and its leaves are edible, and its fruits are edible. Everything about it is very useful, and anybody who owned a tzalaf plant would become wealthy because of what it produced. So Hashem had a nace. He did not violate Shabbos. A tzalaf grew, blocked up the opening, and he also became wealthy from living off that plant that he had. The name of it was a tzalaf plant. How many of those tzalaf plants grew? One. A tzalaf chad grew. So it's brought down from the Zohar. The Mesivta has in its notes, wherever it is, I don't remember where it is. Mesivta has in the notes from some type of Kabbalah Sefer that I'm not familiar with, and I'm not familiar with any Kabbalah form, that the what the Gemara means to say that the tzalaf chad, that the tzalaf is a very tough plant because that plant growing. Oh, I forgot. It's brought down. Missing an important component. It's brought down that this fellow was a Gilgal of tzlafcha, and he wanted to be misakin the Chilul Shabbos that he did in the Midbar. So he was Moshe Nefesh here, not to be Mechal Shabbos and not to block up the wall. So a tzlaf grew there, which reveals in a way that the Mekoshish was tzlafcha. So that those who learn why is it tzlaf a tough plant, because it also had the guts, just like Rabbi Akiva did, to reveal that the Mekoshish was tzlafcha. That's what we saw in Sifta. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. So the Gemara said Moshe's suffix at the end was not in Hilchos Yerusha. It was a suffix in how HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Eretz Yisrael to Klal Yisrael. Did he give it to the door that left Mitzrayim as a Yerusha, or he never gave it to them? It was just going to be through them passing on to their kids. And he was poished. They were poished for him when he went to ask their Rebbeinu Shalom about what to do with the Bnei Slavchad. Kadosh Baruch Hu told him that no, I'm giving it directly to the Yosy Mitzrayim, even though they physically didn't live in Eretz Yisrael, and therefore it's considered muchzuk, not royu, and therefore Slavchad was entitled to 2 portions of his father Chefer's portion of Eretz Yisrael, which his daughters Bnei Slavchad were Bnei Yash. Okay, Zok the Gemara weiter. V'tamoidna lefnei Moshe v'lefnei Elazar HaKohen v'lefnei Nesiim v'chol ha'edom. So it sounds like first they went to Moshe, he didn't have the answer. Then they went to Elazar, and he didn't have the answer. Then they went to the Nesiim, and he didn't have the answer, and they didn't have the answer. And then they asked the whole oilam. Frag the Gemara. After Amdu lefnei Moshe v'loy amr lahem, is it possible that Moshe didn't have the answer, and then they would think that the Nesiim would have the answer? V'amdu lefnei Nesiim v'chol ha'eda ela sareis hamikra v'der sheu. Divrei Rabbi Yosy. The Rishbam explains that what it means is they went to Moshe. When did they go to Moshe? After they had already went to Aaron. And when did they go to Aaron? After they had already went to Nesiim. So why don't you say it in the right order? Because we want to mention the Gadol first in the pasuk. So first Moshe would be mentioned, then the Nesiim would be mentioned, but Avada, Moshe was the one who was approached. That's Rabbi Yosy. Abba Chanan Amar Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, that they approached them all together because they were all sitting in the Bismed. The Bismed is Yoshvin, v'holchu v'amdu lehem lefnei kulam. What is the machlokes as to whether they went up the hierarchy or if they asked everybody together? Mar Sovar, which is Rabbi Eliezer holds, Chol can cover the Talmud b'mokam harav. Even though Moshe was there, it still mentioned everybody else. Maybe you're not supposed to mention anybody else. In other words, maybe if Moshe is there, they should only be focused at Moshe to ask him the Shaila. Yet they're asking everybody. Is that appropriate? So Rabbi Eliezer holds it is appropriate. And therefore we could learn that they approached everybody together. Umar Sober, but Rabbi Yosy holds, Ein Chochin, it would not be respectful to be Chaylik, covered to anybody b'Malka Moshe, and therefore it must be that Sares is a Mikra, and they climbed up the higher. The Hilchas Chaylkin, the law is you will be Chaylik covered the Tabat b'Malka Rav, the Hilchas Ein Chaylik. Frank the Gemara Kasha Hilchas Hilchas. So Gemara Hilchas like Kasha. How the Palak Rabbi Yak? If the Rav, when you come to the Rav like looks to everybody, okay, let's together hear the Shaila. So clearly the Rav is giving covet to everybody, therefore you're allowed to ask everybody together. But how the Palak Rabbi, if the Rebbe didn't do that, then you would have to only ask the Rebbe. Zok the Heilige Gemara Tana we learned. They were clever. Darshani is saying they knew how to dash from psukim. Tzidkani is saying they were tzidkaniyos, and tzidkani. So let's have a look. Chachmani is saying they were wise. Shalofisha Dibra. They didn't just ask Moshe whenever. They actually waited for an opportune time to bring up their Yerusha. The Amar of Shmuel by Rav Yitzchak Melamed. Moshe Rabbeinu Yosy v'Dorish Parshas Yivam. Moshe Rabbeinu was learning the Parsha of Yivam with Klal Yisrael. Shneimar right before the pasuk of Bnei Shalach says, "Yeshu Achem Yaakov." Amru Loi, they told him. No, I'm sorry. This is not right before the Shalach, but this is what they were alluding. So Amru Loi, they told him, I don't understand. Im kiven anu chashuvim. If you treat us like a son, and because of that, if someone has a daughter, his almana does not do Yivam. Well, then we're a son. So to know, let us have nachal like a son. And in lav, if we don't get nachal like a son, which means we're not considered the offspring of the deceased, then tisyabim imenu. So then their mother should do evil. We shouldn't be able to mess up the evil. Miyad, once they asked this question, by Yaakov Moshe es mishpatan of Hashem. So you see, they're wise because they picked a great time to raise this question. The Darshani is saying they also knew how to figure things out. So they said, if our father had a son, we wouldn't say a word, even though we got nothing, because at least our fathers would have had a place to be merged, their chelik to, and it wouldn't be lost. Frank the Gemara of Atanya Bas, they said Bas, which makes no sense at all. No, that's a wrong verse. Although there are those who learn it means Bas Haben, and they said even if we had a brother who was deceased and his daughter wanted it completely to count us out, we would be happy with that as well. What we're not happy with is that our father's nachla will be lost forever. Abai Amar Afilu Haya Bas Leben Lady Barnu. Tzidkani is saying, why were they Tzidkaniyos? Shalainisu Ela Lahagan. They as they were told they should only marry people from the Bnei Shevet, and they waited until they were able to find such people, and that shows that they were Tzidkaniyos. Tani Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov Afilu Ketana Shebehen, even the youngest of them, they waited till they were 40 to marry because they had to wait till they found an appropriate boy, and they weren't going to compromise, which is why they were considered tzidkaniyos, and that's why they didn't get married until they were 40. That's not a good thing. If a girl gets married less than the age of 20, she'll be able to give birth to children. The factory will be open until she's 60. Bas Esrim, if she waited until she was after 20 to marry, then she'll be able to have children until she's 40. But Bas Arboim, if she first got married at 40, Shuv Eina Yeledes, she won't be able to give birth anymore. So why is that a good thing? They would not have children. Here they're trying to continue their father's nachla. It's not really going to work much if they're not going to have children. And the Tzidkaniyos is saying, since they were Tzidkaniyos, Nasa Lahen Neis Kayecheved. They had a Neis like Yecheved that even though they were older, they were able to have children. Now, are you allowed to be Saimech on a Nes? I don't know, but for some reason it did work for them. When Amram remarried Yocheved, it says Bas Levi. She was no Bas. She was 130 years old at the time. Yet it calls her a young girl. Efshir Bas Meya Ushloishim Shana, the Karla Bas. The Amr Abchama Bar Chanina, Zu Yocheved, so he rasa b'derech. The Noel da ben Achaimus. As Klal Yisrael was going down to Mitzrayim, her mother was expecting her already, and she was born as they got in to Eretz Yisrael, to Eretz Mitzrayim. Dichsiv Asher Yolda Oisal Levi Mitzrayim. She was only born to Levi in Mitzrayim. So you see that Leidasa was b'Mitzrayim, Leirasa was Shaloi b'Mitzrayim. And the Rishbam adds that it says they were Shivim Nofesh that came into Mitzrayim, but if you count out the people that are listed, you only get the 69. So that's why we know that she wasn't born in Mitzrayim. She was born right at the entrance to Mitzrayim. So my car lebas. So why was she referred to as a bas, a young woman, girl? When she remarried at 130, she became young again. Nisad and Basra, all of her skin got soft. Her wrinkles stretched out. She reappeared like a beautiful 18-year-old girl. Vayikach, it says that Vayikach, Ke'ilu, Amram met this woman for the first time and took her as a wife. In fact, he was married to her. He already had Aaron and he already had Miriam. So he's taking her back. So Vayachsar miboyele, it should say that he took her back. It shows that he made her a big shebang chasana. He put her in a special palace. The Aaron and Miriam, Aaron and Miriam were singing in front of her. They treated her like a first wedding. This woman's going to have children. Later on, when they got married, the Torah lists them according to their age. The Kan Der Chachmas. But here's Der Chachmasan, because they're not listed in the same order. The yeshiva, halach achar chachma. When you have a question of who should sit even in the Besmedrash, it's always the chacham that's going to sit, even though there might be somebody older than him. But mesiba by a chasana, who do you treat first? Who sits up front? Halach achar zikna. It's the older person. Amar Bashi vuda maflig b'chachma, vuda maflig b'zikna. If someone's a little smarter than another fellow, but the other fellow is older, the guy who's a little smarter doesn't get the covenant of B'shmedrash. He has to be off the charts. He has to be a muvlig b'chachma. Then you'll give him precedence to somebody who is older. And the same thing, if they're close in age to each other, one's a little older, but the other one's a big chacham, you wouldn't be machaber de zokin in the Beis Mishnah. You would be mechaber chacham. Only if he's like way older, then he's entitled to be treated with extra respect by a mesiba. Tana devei Rabbi Shmuel, the nois lafat shkulasam. So Devei Shmuel argues and says they were all equally chachamim. Shenemar vatihena havaya achas. So why they're out of order, I don't know. In one case or the other case, but they were all equal chacham. Amar b'dom Shmuel, v'lois lafat putru li'nasei l'chol shvatim. They themselves were allowed to marry any shvat. They didn't have to marry within the Shevet. Even though in that generation they had to marry within the Shevet, the Nois Salacha themselves did not have to. Shenemar latoy beineim tiyan l'nochim. Elamani mekayim ach l'mishpachas mata aviyim tiliyan l'nochim. I does say that they have to marry mishpachas aviyim. Eitz toiva hisi anakosu. The Torah was merely giving them good advice. Shelo yinasu elo lahaganam. They should marry men who are appropriate for them. Moshe Rabba asked a big kasha. Emor alayim. Tell them, La'oison ha'imdin al har Sinai, l'doroiseichem elu doros aboyim. So it says Emor alayim. Let's look at the pasuk over here. Emor alayim l'doroiseichem kol ish asher yikrav mikol zarachim alakochim asher yitishu b'nei Yisrael Hashem v'tomos hayolov v'nichus ha'nefesh shehim yilafan. So we're talking about the mitzvah that you're not allowed to come into the Beis Hamikdash, Tumash Mikdash v'Kadoshov, that they were in Tztaveh. But there's a little bit of a steer in the pasuk. It says Amar Aleim, meaning to the people of that generation. But the pasuk also sticks in L'Doirei Seichem, which would include Elu Doiros Aboim. This mitzvah applies for all future generations as well. Zok to Gemara, Im Nemar Avos, Lomo Nemar Banim. If it says Avos, why did it say Banim? Im Nemar Banim, Lomo Nemar Avos. Why was it necessary? Why would I have thought that this would be a mitzvah that wouldn't equally apply to the Doris. Why did we have to specify it applies to now and specify that this Mishnah applies to Doris? The teretz is, and v'yesh b'banim mashem b'avos. They each have what the other one doesn't, and there might be an argument to say that the mitzvah only applied either here or there. By Avos it says the whole bas yereshes nachla, meaning by the Avos, by that original Dorf that came into Eretz Yisrael, they were told that they cannot marry out of the Shevet. But the Harbor mitzvahs, so that's a mitzvah to the Avos. The Harbor mitzvahs nitztavu bonim, so nitztavu Avos. There's so many mitzvahs, for instance, mitzvahs atluyas ba'aretz, which were not relevant to the Avos because they never made it into Eretz Yisrael. So ha mipnei sheyesh ba'avos shem b'bonim. There are certain mitzvahs that Avos had and the Bonim didn't, and vice versa. We're not sure this mitzvah who does it apply to. Putzrach loimer Avos, putzrach loimer Bonim. The Torah to specify that this mitzvah is relevant, say in that door and say in all future days. Katanimios. Let's analyze what we just learned. The Avos who oimer the whole basir reshes nach. So it says beferish that every bas yereshes nachla has to marry within the shevet. So how could you tell me that they had the option to marry out of the shevet and it was merely an eitzatayva? It says v'chol basar reshes nachla, speaking to all the people of that generation. Who Moshe lo Rabba asked the kasha who b'farik la levar mibnoi salavchad. There was an exclusion made to the b'noi salavchad. So in fact, everybody else in that door were not allowed to marry out of the shevet. However, the b'noi salavchad, there was an exception made for them. It says so in the pasuk. Amar Mar. Let's analyze the brisa first. But are you telling me it only applies to the avos and not the banim? My mashma. Where do you see that? How do you know that it only applied to that generation? Amar Rava, Amar Kra, Zadavar. So let's look what it says over here. Zadavar shetziva Hashem livnois salaf padlemar. They use the word Zadavar. Even though the Rishpam speaks out, the Zadavar isn't in the pasuk of the Cholabas Rishis Nachla. It's actually in the pasuk where they were told that it's optional, but the Zadavar must be going to the Rishpam on the pasuk of the Cholabas Rishis Nachla. Mimatos b'nei Yisrael lechad b'mishpachas mata avia tialish. So Zadavar, we dash from here. Zadavar zeh lo yehei noyeg ela b'dor zeh. So the extra Zehadavar tells us that this halacha that you have to marry within your shevet only apply to this generation.
So we have the Havamina was doesn't apply to them actually.
It still doesn't apply to them. And the halacha that for everybody else to have to marry only within the shevet, that only applies to this generation because of Zehadavar.
Even though we learn it out in the whole stuff. We learn out this whole thing, even though
it's not true. The pasuk does say that. The pasuk can tell them they can marry whoever they want, but they should marry the shevet. But everybody else is not allowed to marry out of the shevet. But the question is, when the tzivui came that everybody else can't marry out of the shevet, how do we know that that applied only for that generation?
And why are we trying to exclude the Slafka from this requirement? Why don't?
Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu exclude them?
Why is the Gemara trying to read it like that?
That's what the pasuk says. Pasuk said that. The pasuk made the exclusion for them. Why we don't know. So what does it say over here? So Dover said this halacha that you cannot marry out of the shevet. Lo yehi noig ela b'dor zeh.
I don't get it. They married out of their religion also. Pinchas married Lazar married Yisro's daughter.
It's a man's
right?
world. It's a man's world. This prohibition was only the women, not the men.
It's only the women you're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, the pasuk's like talking the whole basi reshes nachla. Any girl who yarshin nachla. It wasn't any woman. A woman who was going to yarshin because she didn't have brothers, she had to marry within.
Only this generation says the land should stay within the city.
Well, how do we know it was only for this generation? Now we know from the Zahadav. Zahadav
Specific about Eretz
tells us that it's only this generation. So Amalei Rab Azuti, the Rabashi, Elmayata Zahadav the Shchutei Chutz. Guess what? By the parsha of Shchutei Chutz, it also is Zahadav. So you're going to tell me that it only applied to that generation? If you could tell me Zahadav is a code word for that it only applies to this generation. So when the pasuk talks about the Isser of Shchutei Chutz, the Isser to shecht a regular carbon out of the base of Mikdash, and we know, of course, the Isser of Shchutei Chutz applied for generations.
Zehadavar is about Eretz Yisrael. That's the thing.
Well, Eretz Yisrael is relevant even in future generations.
No, but the
The Nachlos,
vision-
the Nachlos would be relevant for years to come.
yeah, the vision of Eretz Yisrael is going to be relevant for this generation.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean the prohibition should only be
It'll
relevant.
lead to say that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Hakanamid lo yehinoig ela b'dorza. Are you going to say that that same principle should apply to Shchutei Chutz? So no. Shani Hasam the civil deraisa. By Shchutei Chutz, it also says the deraisa. So what does it say over here? Daber el aharon vel mana vel kol Yisrael v'yamar talim zeh davar shetziv Hashem leimor. That introduced the parsha of Shchutei Chutz, and then the pasuk continues v'lo yizbechu oid esev chayim la'si'irim asherim zoinim acharim chukas oilam tiazois lahem l'deraisa. So it does say that this is something that's going to last forever. So therefore the zeh davar doesn't have an impact, but by Yerusha it has an impact. So Zok Gemara, okay, so let's look around the Torah to find places where the Torah uses Zadavar, and let's see if in fact it's limited only to that generation. So how about Zadavar, the Rosh Hamatos? So that was talking about Nedorim, the parish of Nedorim. It says Vaydaber Moshe el Rosh Hamatos. That's a parish of Matos. Levnei Yisrael Leimor Zadavar Shiv Hashem, and it's the parish of Nedorim. Ishki Jenet Hashem, Moyachal Devorik Chol Yotzim Pivyasa, right? So Hakanamid Lo Yehinoyik Ela B'Dorze. Are you going to tell me that the halachas of Nedorim only apply in that generation? Amalei, no. Hahu Yaliv Zeh Mehasam. The Zeh that's said by Rosh Hamatos, by the price of Nedorim, there's a Gzera Shava from that Zeh to the Zeh of Rosh Hamatos of Nedorim. I'm sorry, to the Zeh of Shchutei Chutz. And by Shchutei Chutz, it says L'Daraisam. So normally Zeh Dover would only mean a generation. But since you have a Gzer Shava of the Zeh by Rosh Hamatos, the Zeh by Nedorim, to the Zeh by Shchutei Chutz, and by Shchutei Chutz it also says L'Daraisam, so that Zeh Dover won't limit it to just that generation. So I'm like, who y'all live Zeh Zeh Mehasam? Frank the Gemara, Hainami Leilav Zeh Zeh Mehasam. Guess what? We have a Zeh Dover by the B'nai Salaf, but by the Yerusha. Why did you also learn our Zeh from the Zeh in Shchutei Chutz and say it applies to every generation? Zok Mar Haima. There's a very big difference. Bishlama Hasam Itzrich L'Gzer Shafa. Bishlama over there, by Shchutei Chutz and by Nedorim, the Rashbam says, L'Hagi Kos of Zeh, you know why it says Zeh? Itzrich L'Hachzer Shafa the Binu L'Meimer B'Sama. There's going to be several other halachas that the parish of Nedorim and the parish of Shchutei Chutz are going to share. So we need a Gzer Shava. Once you have the Gzer Shava, you'll use it as well to say that it applies for all future generations. But Hacha L'May Yitzrich, there's no other information that we need to learn to the case of Nachlas from Shchutei Chutz. So why, if the Zeh is going to bail it out and say it applies forever, Lish de Kramine, forget the whole Zeh Dover, and we would assume it applies forever. It was only Zeh Dover that said it only applies for this generation. And now you're going to say that you'll learn Gzer Shava from this set to that set. Better don't say anything. And by default, the mitzvah of Loisis of Nachlois would have applied for future generations. So that's the answer. So that's what we have. We have three places that we're aware of here, which is Adover. It says it by the Nachlas to tell us that it only applies to this generation. And the two other places where it says it, which are by Nedorim and by Shchutei Chutz, we have by Shchutei Chutz a pasuk that specifically says L'Dayrais. So even though even though you have the Zeh Dover, but there's a pasuk saying L'Dayrais, so once we know by Shchutei Chutz is L'Dayrais, we share that information to Gzer Shava to Nedorim, and there's other halachas that we're also going to learn, pass back and forth between Nedorim and Shchutei Chutz. They're unique. They're compared to each other. So Zok to Gemara, my Gzer Shava. What is the Gzer Shava? What are we learning back and forth between Nedorim and Shchutei Chutz? The Tanya. Nemer kan Zeh Dover, v'nemer l'halon Zeh Dover. Ma l'halon arin uvanu b'chol Yisrael, av kan ar uvanu b'chol Yisrael. just like by Shchut Chutz, there's an Isser for everybody, so too by Nedarim, you don't only need Aaron Uvana, but Chol Yisrael, anybody could be a dying like we all just were on Erev Rosh Hashanah. You don't need Chachamim in order to be able to be mounted Nedarim. Umakan Roshei HaMatos, and just like by Nedarim it says Roshei HaMatos, it's got to be the top. Aflalon Roshei HaMatos, it also has to be the Gadol Hador, which is somewhat contradictory to what we said a moment ago. So we're going to have to understand this. Omar Mar, Mala alone Aaron Nubana B'Chol Yisrael, Afkan Aaron Nubana B'Chol Yisrael, anybody can be mounted. What are we teaching us with this? Omar Bacha Bar Yaakov Loimer Shaforesh Nedarim B'Shloisha Adyotis. You could do a Taurus Nedarim even though you don't have 3 Rabbanim, 3 Adyotis could do it, and that's what we learn from Shchut Echot to Nedarim. But it says Rosh Hamatos, you need a Gadol Hador. So Gemara, that's to tell you something else. By Nedarim only, Amar B'Chista, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, B'Yochad Mumcha. You could use 3 pshutim. That's what we learn from Shchut Echot. But Rosh Hamatos tells you that if you have 1 massive Talmid Chacham, he could be matter another without 2 other people. Umakan Rosh Hamatos, just like by the Parsha of the Dorim, it says Rosh Hamatos, Afal Rosh Hamatos. What are we teaching to Shchut Echot from the Dorim? Just like by another, we know you could be shoyel. It says Loyachal Devarei, Aval Acher Miyachlan. I saw other people could be matter another for you. So too, if you're makdish something, you could actually be shoyel on the hektish, and you could make it oisek, which is very interesting because someone could have been makdish an animal as a carbon, shechted it b'chutz, been mechuyev kares for Shchut Echot, then he could go be shoyel on the hektish, so retroactively he was never hektish, and now he wasn't over Shchut Echot. He could do that. Ula Beishamai the Amri ain't shela behektish. Beishamai has a unique shita. He holds that you can never undo hektish, even if you were shoyel by a chacham. In other words, you could say you made a mistake. Had I known ABC, I wouldn't have done it. Even though the whole thing was a mistake, it's too bad. It remains hektish. So according to him, you don't have that limud from Rosh Hamatos. So we're going to need to find something else that gets learned to Shchut Echot from the Dorim. But what did Beishamai say? Now Beishamai said, Beishamai hektish tos is hektish. And the Rishbam says the case is, if I say the next animal that's going to come out of my barn that's black is going to be a carbon, and a white one came out. The loch is it's a carbon. It's not hektish. So according to Beishamai, hi zev zeh my avdali. How is Beishamai going to learn? What's he going to learn out of this Gzer Shava? Zeh davar de Shchut Echot mi boyelei. Vivaldi doesn't hold of any Hataras Nedarim of it all, so you can't learn Hataras Nedarim either, that you could use 3 Yechidim, because it's not relevant. There's no Sha'il at all in the Kabbalah Tektish. So from Shchut Echot he's going to learn Miboyle ala Shoichetu Chayiv ve'inei Chayiv alamoy. When it says Zeh it's not even Gzer Shava. It's telling you something completely different. It's telling you that you're only mechuyev for Shechita, not for Malika. Now, when you're a mark of a bird as a carbon, you have to make Malika. If you made Malika on the bird, b'chutz, you won't be over. But if you shechted the bird b'chutz, which is not even the way you could have done it b'fnim, that's the only way it'll be over, because the Zeh Dover, the pasuk specifically says shechting. The pasuk does not talk about Malika. And Zeh Dover, the Rosh Hamatos, what will they learn from there? L'chacham mater be'in bam. A chacham could say mutalach mutalach. A Baal who says mutalach has 0 impact. Baal mefer. A husband would say, I'm being made for your nether. In chacham mefer, if the chacham says mufarlach, it will have 0 impact. He has to use the right syntax. I'm sorry. The chacham is asking you, had you known A, B, and C, would you have done it? So you say no. So he showed you that the whole thing was a mistake. Meikara. He's oikad and nether meikara. He's mafreya from the beginning. So mutarlach, the whole thing is mutar. Muver means I'm just overruling it, and that only works mekano laba. The Baal's made for his wife's nether. It's only from here on. She had to have kept the nether up until that point. So Zok to Gemara. Well, the Beishamai the last Lugzer Shava Hafarish Nedarim B'Shloisha Hijyotis Minoluku. Beishamai doesn't have the Gzer Shava, right? Because he uses the Zeh Dover for something else. So how is he going to know that you can use Shlosh Yotos to be Mater Nether, like we do on Erev Rosh Hashanah. You learned from a different place. It says V'Yedaber Moshe es Mayade Hashem al Bnei Yisrael. That's in Parshas Pinchas. That's the parsha we're learning now. Rabbi Yosy Glili Omer, and we're not going to get into this Bryce now. I'll just read it. Mayade Hashem Nemru Shabbos Bereshis Noinem. It's only talking about Mayade Hashem, but not Shabbos. The Rashbam tells us that whenever the Gemara says Shabbos Bereshis, it's referring to regular Shabbos. So why can't it just say regular Shabbos? Because that could be confused with Yom Tovim about the Torah writes about the many times Shabbos Shabbos. So that's whenever the Gemara wants to refer to Shabbos, it's called Shabbos Bereshis. Now the Yomer Mayad Hashem Nemru Hafar Shadom Anem. So we'll get into that later. But right now we're at the point where we want to know how does Bishamai know that Hataras Nadarim can be done with Riyajaitos, and that we'll have to figure out tomorrow. So tomorrow we're talking learning at 6 because the davening is at 6, is at 7, not at 7:10. I'm sorry. I'm going to try to be here. I feel bad. My